We cannot escape this man, Elon Musk. Okay, we had several events occur this week. The big one was the much anticipated Governor Ron DeSantis announcement that he's running for president on the GOP side, and it was going to be announced on Twitter. Okay, kind of a landmark moment, a turning point that you don't have to go to the mainstream media anymore. You can do it on, a social network. Okay, they crashed it. They were down for 20 minutes. Now, this raises some interesting questions. Where were his advanced people making sure that there was going to be enough firepower? They know he has a certain percentage of GOP voters because of the polls. They must have expected that millions of people might want to get on board. Elon should have known that was happening, and yet the whole thing crashes. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Friday, May 26th installment of the Silicon Insider, the only uncensored look at life and business in Silicon Valley. My name is Mike Malone, and I'm here with special contributor Scott Budman, technology reporter for NBC News Bay Area. Our producer is Jordan Henderson. Our East Coast correspondent is Bob Grove, and our host, as always, is the Silicon Valley Business Journal. Okay, well, Scott, now we know who's already won the AI war. Semiconductor technology and a certain couple of companies. I mean, this was really the week where no more speculating about AI. Now this is where the rubber hits the road. Orders are being made. It looks like everybody, the nature of the demand right now, it looks like every company in the world is prototyping with AI chips. And certain companies who make AI chips did really, really well, like astoundingly well.
Yeah, and I know you're talking about NVIDIA, and what an explosion for that company. I mean, in market value,
the fastest growing company in the Valley, at least chip company, maybe in the world. And then its shares spiked 26% in one day, pushing the company right to the brink of being our newest trillion-dollar unicorn.
Yeah, it's amazing. And you're right, because they did it by actually taking orders for AI, related chips. And it's interesting because you said at the top, this is one of those times where everyone wants to get in on something. I mean, remember the dot-com boom when everything became something.com. And for a lot of those companies, I'd say the great majority of them, they were sort of dot-com washing, talking about in the environment, greenwashing. And I think we're going to see a lot of AI washing because everything right now is trying to say, hey, this is what we do. And we're getting into AI and we're pivoting. And some investors are going to get burned because there's not going to be anything to back that up. But it's interesting because the foundation of Silicon Valley has been chips every generation. It's been the chips. And now I think we're seeing another comeback. And look at just the last couple of days for NVIDIA and Broadcom and to an extent AMD. These companies that are getting involved in AI on the real ground level, on the picks and shovel level, and they're being richly rewarded.
So do you think that investors are overbuying? I mean, they've done this a couple times before with NVIDIA in the past. Other people, observers, are saying, no, this one looks real. This one could hold instead of a pullback. What do you think? I think the market got a little too enthusiastic this week because they also drove up Marvell, and Marvell has been kind of a Debbie Downer the last 6 months. Things aren't going real well, and all of a sudden, now they soared 25% this week because they beat their numbers a little bit.
Right, and I think there is a sheen right now on the chip industry in general, and let's set AI and NVIDIA aside for just a moment. Think about the CHIP Act and the tens of billions of dollars the government put towards largely Silicon Valley chip companies. That was a real shot in the arm for this industry that has been strong forever, but lagging lately. And now, even within the beginning of the week that you and I are talking in, Vice President Harris came to town to Sunnyvale to Applied Materials, which said, hey, guess what? We're going to spend $4 billion of that money to build a brand new chip equipment facility. Talk about the ground level of all this stuff. The equipment,
the ultimate tail of the job are semiconductor equipment companies. They're They're not even at the top of the food chain. They're in the air above the food chain.
They get it all started. And Applied stock has been on a roll lately because I think people realize the need for more chips means good times for chip equipment. And then you get this AI sheen. And I agree. I think some of it is sort of pixie dust on some of the other smaller chip companies that have not proven that they're in the game yet. They need to try to get in that game really quickly, although they may get left behind. But for some of these companies, they're already front and center. And I mean, look at the valuations, especially for NVIDIA and Broadcom. I mean, wow, it's been an incredible week for people to either rediscover chips or say, hey, this is once again where the action is.
You know, as I read all this, my second or third thought was, where's Intel?
Right. Right.
Has Intel literally missed the boat again?
That has been, for the last decade or so, their role in every new technology is to miss the boat. Yes.
Okay, well, do we know if they're working on any AI stuff?
I would be surprised if they're not. But while their stock had a good day, say Friday, I think that was on the backs of positive earnings, more building.
And the market lifts all boats, and everyone's going into chips. And I think dumb people may go into the wrong chip companies, like Intel, perhaps.
Right. I mean, I wonder about Intel. And, you know, the good news for Silicon Valley and America in general, Applied Materials says it's going to build that facility in Silicon Valley, in Sunnyvale, hire about 2,000 local people. And I mean, when was the last time, I defer to you on this, when was the last time a giant chip or equipment facility was built here? And by here, I mean America.
I think you have to go back into the 90s.
Okay. So that's really significant.
I think out there by Great America and Lockheed Industrial Park, those are the last ones we've seen. So yeah, it's been 30 years, 20 years. This has not been a hardware valley for a long time. And now all of a sudden, it's not just a hardware valley at the top end, you know, with Tesla and Apple and all that. We're going back to our roots and actually talking silicon in Silicon Valley.
Right. And that's why I think this is so significant, because these chips now, you just see them everywhere. They're in your home, they're in your car, they're in your portable device, they're in your laptop, they're in your, desktop, they're everywhere. And for an American company and the American industry to sort of restake a claim, I think is pretty significant.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if these companies can hold off moving it overseas into these, foundries like TSMC.
Right.
They can keep it domestic this time and build the fabs and do all that. And that CHIP Act will probably help fund that. Let's see if they can take advantage of it and do it properly.
Yeah, and I think it'll be needed even more. I mean, you think about the AI game is just getting started, and we're already seeing money flowing into that. I mean, last week's question was, how do you play AI in the stock market? And this week, the answer was pretty clearly NVIDIA, maybe a little Broadcom, maybe a little of Tom Siebel's company. And there's not many other ways to do that yet. And that's pretty significant for these guys that are out front. But AI is just getting started. EVs are just getting started. We're going to have a country of EVs within a decade or so. They're going to need a lot more chips. And so I think this industry is going to continue to be really important. And I think that CHIP Act is going to be looked at as America at least trying, we don't know if it's been successful yet, but trying to stake a claim on this global surge that I think we're going to see in the semiconductor business.
It'd be interesting you mentioned Tom Siebel. I mean, I wrote a book with him. I know Tom well. I mean, he's one of the underappreciated success stories in Valley history. I mean, Oracle and Siebel Systems, his current company. I mean, he's almost invisible, but he's one of these guys. There's several of them in this town that are major players and entrepreneurial masters that we don't ever talk about. They don't show up on this show. They certainly don't show up on national television, but they're the ones that are not getting all the drama in the media and just getting things done. And as long as we still have those guys around, we're probably in pretty good shape.
We recently talked about the memory of Gordon Moore and how one of the things that stood out about him was he didn't want to be in the headlines. He wasn't on some gigantic yacht. I would put Siebel, not necessarily in the Moore's Law category, but in terms of executives who have done spectacularly well created a whole bunch of wealth. There are probably tens of thousands of people in the Bay Area and beyond who owe their fortune to Tom Siebel. But you're right, he just doesn't make news much. I mean, the last story I did on him that wasn't AI related was because he was making a huge donation to try to stop meth addiction in, I think, Montana, because that's where he was putting his money towards that charity. And he doesn't make a lot of big headlines, and I think he just prefers it that way. He's a quiet.
No, he doesn't want the headlines.
Right.
Okay, we cannot escape this man, Elon Musk. Okay, we had several events occur this week. The big one was the much anticipated Governor Ron DeSantis announcement that he's running for president on the GOP side, and it was going to be announced on Twitter. Okay, kind of a landmark moment, a turning point that you don't have to go to the mainstream media anymore. You can do it on, a social network. Okay, they crashed it. They were down for 20 minutes. Now, this raises some interesting questions. Where were his advanced people making sure that there was going to be enough firepower? They know he has a certain percentage of GOP voters because of the polls. They must have expected that millions of people might want to get on board. Elon should have known that was happening, and yet the whole thing crashes.
Right. I tuned
What
in.
are the implications of that? And then by the time they come back, they have several 100,000 people left. But most people just said, "Oh, okay, it's not on." It's sort of like Victoria's Secrets, the modeling events years ago. They used to crash all the servers on the internet. Well, this was the same thing. I mean, don't you think you should prepare a little more for something like that?
Yes, of course you should. And I think Governor DeSantis' first problem was that he trusted Elon Musk, and that was a bad move.
Yeah.
And I think the advanced people should have looked into Twitter and said, wait a minute, you fired virtually everybody that would take care of an event this size. How are we going to take care of an event this size? There's no answer that's honest from Elon Musk. And that goes back to number one. He trusted Elon Musk, and that was a big mistake. And so it came off as badly. It reflects badly on Twitter. Twitter didn't do it right, not just in terms of having the server power. They had, I think, a podcaster host this, so that doesn't look like a major network. They lied about it afterwards. Even Linda Yaccarino, the new CEO, was on there saying, "Hey, what a big success." Come on, this wasn't a big success.
When you start out with potentially millions of people tuning in,
Right.
and you end up finally attracting 161,000 viewers who managed to hang around for 20 minutes staring at the walls, that's a failure.
Right. I tuned in.
It's a failure for DeSantis because he could have gotten more of an audience if he went on the Country Western channel, if he went on Home Shopping Network.
Right.
He would have had a larger audience than he got on this failed Twitter announcement. It's the biggest announcement of a politician's career.
Right. And the significant thing is, on all those places you mentioned, he would have kept whatever audience he had, at least from the beginning, because they wouldn't have crashed. And you just can't have something this size with this potential and not have it work. And I don't think there were backups in place. I think this caught everyone by surprise, which speaks badly of, are we going to have a Tucker Carlson show do this? Come on, what else is going to be wrong with this supposed media company when you've fired all the people that put on the media? I was on it myself.
The notion of becoming a media platform may have to go on.
And I was thinking of that. I was in a hotel room and I tuned in, I got thrown out. I tuned back in, I got thrown out. And it took, honestly, a lot of patience and a lot of pressing buttons to hear anything that Governor DeSantis was saying. And so much of it ended up being sort of the Elon Musk show. And I've covered him for a long time. I don't need to know any of this. I need to know about Governor DeSantis and what he's going to do as president.
Only a newsie would stay on for those 20 minutes. Everybody else went and got dinner.
I had a feeling that was going on. You could feel the sort of, even sitting alone in a hotel room in the Northeast, I could feel the air deflate out of whatever balloon DeSantis was trying to launch, because this would have been big for him and for Musk. And I think it didn't go well for either of them.
Okay, well, other Elon news. This is kind of interesting. Ford Motor Company's stock jumped more than 7% today after it announced a deal allowing its electric vehicle owners to access rival Tesla's charging stations. That's a big deal. I mean, he's already going to build the batteries. Now he's got the platform for charging. I mean, in terms of creating a vertical infrastructure, Elon's nailing every step along the way. And with Ford on board, which is America's second largest automaker, he's essentially, they didn't say they've created a standard for everybody else, but they kind of created a de facto standard for who's going to be in charge of charging stations.
I'm convinced that one of the reasons Teslas by far outsell other EVs is because of that supercharger network. And I think this is a good move, not only for the overall, let's get more EVs out there, but it's also a revenue, generator for Tesla, because people do pay for these chargers. And so because they were out front with them by years, this is a great move. I've seen Rivian's charge at Tesla's charging stations, and now we'll see Ford's and perhaps even others. And while all of these other smaller charging companies, the Charge Points and the EVgo's of the world, and they're very important to the whole overall scheme, they're sort of getting there. Tesla is already there. And for them to say, hey, other EV companies, come to us, is again, good for the overall picture, but also a good revenue generator. This is a really good move, I think, by Musk and by Tesla.
Yeah, I think it's going to end up like the old days. You have several big, you have Mobil, and you have Shell, and you have Atlantic Richfield, and they dominate. But the world's also full of little tiny gas stations and indies and all of that. And that's exactly what you want, I think, because they keep each other honest, but they still provide enough supply. It's a nice ecology for the charging world. Though it's going to be interesting when you're sitting there with your Tesla and this Ford F-250, on the big tires, bigger than mine, come rolling up next to you.
That's what we need to see. We talk about this, and the energy companies, and you just mentioned some of the bigger ones, they talk a good game about, hey, we're getting into all these green energy things. If that were true, we'd have charging stations already set up at gas stations all over the country. And I admit, I've never seen one. They're not telling the truth, and they're going obsolete within the next decade. So they will probably also follow on the heels of these companies that are doing it, but they already have the infrastructure and the places that cars know to stop, and they haven't gone EV yet. And that's a huge missed opportunity. And, say what you will about Musk, he is taking advantage of the fact that everybody else is simply dragging their feet, not just when it comes to helping the planet, but literally when it comes to making money. And that's the big surprise here.
Yeah. Okay, another thing, Elon project this week. You know about Neuralink?
Yes.
We've been talking about this, and we've been saying, the next big thing ought to be, or should be, or will be, is going to be med tech. Unfortunately, the VCs are not putting any money into it. Thank you, Elizabeth Holmes. The money's dried up for medical technology, but I mean, we talked about Apple and that subdermal blood reader for the watch. Well, this is a brain implant company, and they just got a green light from the U.S., the FDA, to kickstart the first in-human clinical study. That's a major step. Now, they're going to be watched real closely, because anytime you go through the skin, the surface of the skin inside the body, it opens a whole can of worms on the approval process. But the fact that they're beginning the study now officially, in in-human study, company's, 6 years old, it's made a lot of claims. Looks like it's coming through. I mean, brain implants could have, a number of implications: blindness, paralysis. Did you see that photograph this week of that guy who had been paralyzed from the armpits down, and they did some implants, and he's actually walking there. which is the dream. They put a chip in his head and they put a chip in his spine that talk to each other, and he's walking. I mean, this is the kind of miracles that we haven't seen in a while in the medical world, but this could change a lot of things. It could be revolutionary.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of the intersection of tech and healthcare. I don't understand, and I willingly admit I don't understand anything about putting a chip into the brain. That sounds a little strange. I mean, remember how freaked out people got about getting a vaccine, for goodness sake, something we've been doing for generations and generations, because they were worried somehow that a chip would be implanted in you, right?
Yes.
And obviously that's not true. But now we are literally talking about putting a chip in your brain. And I just don't know enough to comment other than I hope it works. And I mean, it's what Elon Musk's fourth or fifth company, which also gives me pause. Right. But I guess we can watch this for a while, because I don't imagine this is something that will develop.
Yeah. But this is probably going to be clinical studies are going to go on, and then you got to get FDA full approval.
Yeah.
We're looking at a decade, but still, it's exciting. Okay. Oh God, Elizabeth Holmes. She's apparently there's a growing body of concern that now she's going into prison. That I guess Martha Stewart went through this, and Jen Shaw from the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City went to jail, and pictures of her leaked out. And now they've gone public because Jen Shaw was in the same facility as Elizabeth Holmes going to in Texas. That there seems to celebrities' photos seem to be leaking out of prisons. Is this a major concern? Should we worry about this?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, having followed the Elizabeth Holmes thing quite closely, remember she allowed and perhaps even invited photographers for the sort of last days, that I get to spend with mom.
Well, she's apparently rebranding herself, looking like a suburban housewife rather than a mistress of the universe.
Right. But there is a conscious, that plus the New York Times, a conscious public relations effort here. So clearly this is not someone, and I would guess that the housewife, someone on Real Housewives is not shy as well. This is someone not shy of press. And so would I be surprised if something leaks out of prison? No. But just a note, as we tape this, we are less than 96 hours away from her reporting time. And so maybe as you're listening to this, she's already checked into prison. And so we'll know exactly where that is and how that's gone by this time. But yeah, although I also wonder if she rises to the celebrity level of people are going to try to get pictures of her snuck out of prison. I just don't know.
Classic orange jumpsuit shot.
Right. And again, this whole experience of covering her has surprised me every step of the way. So even as someone who's followed this closely, I don't think anything else could surprise me moving forward. But yeah, if people want their privacy, they should have their privacy, period, end of story.
Yes.
So, I'm not going to be hanging from a helicopter trying to get photos from, the jailhouse walk. I just don't know how, or if she'll even rise to that level. It'll be interesting to see.
Okay. And finally, this is Memorial Day weekend, when we, remember all the soldiers and sailors and airmen that gave their lives. I think about it a lot because you and I are sitting here to measure what's been accomplished in the last century in the technological revolution, which has no precedent in human history. 80 years ago, my father, 23 years old, sat in front of a computer, just like you and I are doing right now. The difference was it was a Norden bomb site as part of his 30 missions in a B-17 in World War II. This thing was a giant, clunky analog computer, one of the very first modern, semi-modern computers. He was required to shoot the thing. If the plane started to go down, it was so rare, it was such a top secret item, he had to shoot the thing with his .45 if the plane started to go down. And if it kept working, He was supposed to ride with it down into the crash. That was what it took to work a computer then. You and I are sitting here. Each of our computers has more computing power. Our MacBooks here, these little tiny things, has more computing power than all of the computers in the world, including ENIAC, 80 years ago. This is how far we've come. And it's a miracle. And as we think about these, these men who died, also men and women who died, they also are, creatures of our modern technological world with new weapons and all of that. And it costs them and it saves us. And, I fear sometimes we take it for granted what amazing miracles have occurred and what gift we have.
So, I absolutely agree. Amen. Absolutely.
That's it for now, folks. You can find us on the Silicon Valley Business Journal homepage, as well as on Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, LinkedIn, and check out our YouTube page. Have a great holiday weekend. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.